Get started.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. With a quorum, we'll start with item 2, approval of the April 27th, 2026 meeting summary. There are no
Move
changes. I'll
approval.
take a motion for approval. Thank you, Bob.
Second.
And Mike. Thank you. All those in favor? Please say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we'll move to item 3, discussion and recommendation on the 2028-2031 call for projects. Ryan.
All right, thank you, Emily. So obviously this is the only item on the agenda today, and I have a lot of good discussion points I want to discuss with the TAC. But we're just going to go through the kind of some final changes and some updates that we've had based on our meeting with the Transportation Policy Board on Monday. If you'll just go to the next slide. So we are finalizing the final report and pending any discussion items here at the TAC meeting, and we're doing some final QA/QC. This is really kind of the last step we're going to take for the call for products until the policy board meeting on June 8th, I believe, and it will include an introduction, obviously the recommendation, and then we'll have detailed information on the risk assessment as well as the project scores. So on the next slide, what I want to discuss in particular today, we had a few recommendation updates based on some discussions we had with the Transportation Policy Board. And I'm going to go into those in detail, but this is a good summary right here. Because we had additional TASA funding available to allocate, we didn't program all of those out yet. So we went back and looked. This is something we've discussed at the board. We went and took a hard look at some projects that were eligible for TASA funding to see if we could get those off high center. We were able to identify 4 projects to move into the recommendation. We also shifted around some funding program assignments in order to maximize the TASA and carbon reduction program funding that's available for programming. And those changes also opened up with some additional STBG. And so we were able to add 3 more projects to the recommendation that were next up in the list, and I'll go through those projects. And then finally, category 2 projects have been identified from the recommended projects. If you remember back in January, I believe, we did a swap with TxDOT for $23 million in surface transportation block grant funding for category 2. So we went back and looked at the recommended projects and identified projects that qualified for category 2 and assigned those projects to those fundings, that source. So let's go in detail. I'll start with the 4 projects that have gone from not recommended to recommended based on the availability of TASA funding and revisiting that risk determination. So 3 projects that we're adding for Great Springs. They have 2 projects that are in partnership with the city of Buda. These are 2 studies and also another partnership study with Hayes County. So we've added those. After looking at the risk determination, we feel comfortable that we can move those from high to moderate. And so we'll move forward with those projects. Additionally, the city of Kyle, the Philomena sidewalk project, we identified that project as well. It's a little early in design, but given the nature of TASA funding and the risk of lapse, we thought it was appropriate to move this project from high risk to moderate risk as well. And so that program's an additional $2.5 million in TASA funding. And so that whittles down that amount a little bit. And so we're adding those to the recommendation. And then on the next slide, we talk about the program assignments. This also helped us maximize the TASA funding. So there were 3 projects in particular. These are 3 City of Austin projects. These are substandard street projects where they're going to upgrade basically the main lanes. They're not going to add any additional capacity, but they're going to bring them up to City of Austin to modern standards. And then about half the project is also adding shared use path, bike lanes, and sidewalks. And so what we did looking at that, we originally had the top 2 on that list programmed for surface transportation block grant funding due to the roadway components. But looking at the carbon reduction program eligibilities with those roadway components, we realized they were also eligible for carbon reduction funding. And so what we've done, and it's about 50-50 split on the work scope. And so we split those between TASA and carbon reduction funding on all 3 of those projects. Manchac is also in a similar situation where it's design funding, but really the same scope. And so allowing us to do that, moving those, we have maximized as much TASA as possible, as well as the carbon reduction funding. Because of those changes with carbon reduction, we did have to move the Cap Metro project out an additional year to 2031. And all of these have been adjusted to the fiscal year there. So these changes are going to be reflected in the updated recommendation. Does help us spend down that TASA funding as well as the carbon reduction funding. We think this is a more appropriate funding program selection for these projects. You go to the next slide. Because of that, we also had some additional STBG funding because we were able to shift those projects over. So went right back to that list and just went down to the next 3 eligible projects that were moderate or low risk. And so with that, we're adding an additional planning study from the city of Austin, the US 183 South schematic from TxDOT, as well as County Road 138 from Williamson County. These were moderate to low risk projects that were next up in the ranking. So we just went down that list and program those products in. So we're maximizing SVG, TASA, and carbon reduction in the updated recommendation. And on this last slide, so these are the 3 projects that we've identified. Now, I did just send this list to TxDOT this morning, so this needs to be confirmed by TxDOT, and we've identified their I-35 at Kohler's Crossing grade separation project, the Williamson County Palmer Lane to SH45, as well as TxDOT's State Spur 26. I do want to point out that the IH35 Kohler's Crossing also has an additional $1 million in STBG attached to it because we had exactly $23.4 million in Category 2. So Palmer Lane and State Spur 26 are entirely Category 2. We needed to keep some of that STBG on the I-35 project to make sure that it was fully funded. So those are the changes to the recommendation list. As we've kind of moved to finalize everything. So I've got a couple of, the next couple of slides are really kind of some discussion items that I wanted to bring up. So one thing, we're going to create a standby list. And what this list is basically essentially all the projects that weren't initially recommended in this project call are going to be on a separate list that will be available for us. So one thing I want to point out is that we have $160 million in contingent recommendations. They're going to require additional steps prior to us programming in the TIP. And because of that, we want to just make sure that we had a list available to us. You know, obviously the application process ends, and then getting these projects through the next steps is a big, very you know, complicated process. And so if any projects, for whatever reason, don't move forward, we want to have a list available that we can turn to. And recommend to the policy board, make available to you as well as TAG members that we can immediately go to should a project fall out, that we have a list that we can go jump into and move into that slot. And so we're going to have that list as well in the recommendation report, and it'll be available at we'll make it available to everyone at programming decision points. And then finally, there were a couple of items that were brought up. You go to the next slide, sorry. Sorry, I'm a little under the weather here. So there are a couple of items that the policy board brought up and conversations I've had with you, several of the TAC members and sponsors that also came up at the policy board meeting. Wanted to bring those up to the technical advisory committee for your feedback and thoughts on it before we take these items back to the policy board. The first one, this was a combining project applications. And so we had 18 project applications that were submitted as segments of larger projects. We evaluated each segment independently based on the application. Each application was considered on its own. And so most, and a lot of those, actually, I would say every single one of those scored differently. And so one of the questions that came up at the policy board meeting, and questions I've had with sponsors as well, is can we consider those projects as one? Right now, that would mean we would need to go back and rerun the modeling for those projects and average out those scores as well. And so right now we're not recommending that, but wanted to bring that up. I mean, it's a good point. I think there were, I think Hayes County they submitted 2 segments for FM 2001, or actually 3. Williamson County had 4 segments for Ronald Reagan. I know Round Rock, you had 2 segments for Kitty Fort Boulevard, segments 5 and 6. One's recommended, and some of those, a lot of those get split up. So some are recommended, others are not. So a lot of those didn't stay together, but I wanted to bring that up for consideration and discussion at the TAC see if y'all had any thoughts on that. So that's one question. And I'll just go ahead and jump into the second one too, and then just open it up from there. But fixing applications, I think this is a question I get every single time we do this process. And came up at the policy board meeting last Monday is, a lot of a common question we get, if we've identified these mistakes and, your risk is high or critical, is there an opportunity to fix those? Right now, there is not currently a process for that. As a competitive process, it's really, we can only evaluate what is submitted. And so if we did allow everyone to open up, we'd have to reopen the application process, allow everybody the opportunity to make corrections to their application, and then reevaluate all the products and do a completely new recommendation. So that's the process that we take now. I do think that might be something worth exploring in the future if we have a set process for it. But right now, our recommendation is not to reopen those applications. But again, I think it's important to get your feedback as TAC members. I do think it is, I can see how it's frustrating. Sometimes we have very good projects where it could be a simple mistake, like forgetting to attach a plan set or forgetting to attach a cost estimate, which you may have had on your desktop and you just forgot to attach it and we don't have it, therefore you're higher critical risk. That's frustrating, but again, it's a competitive process. I think we have to have those structured rules, but whatever we do, we just have to make sure that everybody's treated exactly the same. So those are the two key points that were brought up last Monday that I really wanted to get your feedback on. So, and on the last slide is really just the updated recommendation, just as a backdrop to the discussion. But this reflects all of the changes that I had mentioned, and it shows the different funding programs. So right now, all told, it should be about $344 million worth of recommended projects. So that's the end of the presentation. So I'll open it up for questions and comments, and certainly discussion points. Would love your feedback on those two items I mentioned before.
Thank you, Ryan. Anyone have any comments or questions?
So Ryan, reopening it up, would that qualify Caldwell County for the projects that the applications were fully completed, but were not submitted through technical error? Would that qualify as an opening up for the Caldwell projects that did not finish the last confirmation but had full applications?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a perfect example, honestly. And
there were, to my understanding, there are about 14 other.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I was just going to say, to my understanding, there are 12 to 14 other projects and jurisdictions that had a similar issue.
No, I mean, there were, unknown, I guess. There were 14 draft applications that didn't get submitted. They could have been draft that, they abandoned and didn't decide to submit. I'm not sure. At the time of the application portal being closed, there were 14 draft ones in the system, including y'all's. So I don't know about the other ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a perfect example of, this issue and, why I wanted to bring it up.
So just for clarification for the committee, and Ryan grade my comments here, but the applications were fully completed. The submittal went wrong for some reason or another, and so they did not technically get submitted, but the applications were completed ahead of time. And to my knowledge, as Ryan just explained, there were some similarities of issues with other people.
Well,
Yeah, no, I think that describes that.
Okay. Bob?
well, obviously the challenge is that it's quicksand. If we open up anything, then you're basically starting over. Let's just be honest. You've got to give everybody a chance to change everything. And I think we need to learn from the mistakes in the process, and next time put in whatever changes we want to make to address whatever issues we feel like we need to address. But to reopen things at this point, you're basically starting from scratch. And I think we need to recognize from that.
Thanks, Bob. Lua?
Yeah, just to, kind of what Bob's saying. So I would be starting over, like there's not additional funding out there that they could possibly get. So some that we've been notified that somebody has funding for could potentially lose funding according to these that missed the opportunity because their application wasn't complete. Is that correct?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
So yeah, kind of what Bob's saying is we're starting over pretty much. So some project that we've all been kind of notified that they're moving forward for approval could potentially lose funding. Is that
Yes.
what we're saying?
Yeah.
So
I think,
how about
we have to give the
particularly
opportunity to everybody. Sorry.
to avoid that? Could there be and guys, I have a bias here. There were like 3 applications that occurred in Caldwell County. That again, the applications were complete, but they weren't submitted for some reason on the technical basis. So I'm wearing that hat in all fairness. But that said, what if there was like a hybrid and you took out the projects that under one set of criteria have already been ranked and funded, and then you re-ranked and you went through a process of the projects that were not funded, and at least those were a developed list. That way the people that were funded and been notified knows that their funding is secure, and then that moves forward. But there's a reorganization of the other list that is unfunded. Perhaps that may be.
And that's kind of the intent of the standby list. Was kind of the thought process behind that is, I don't know, because the 2 projects that you had, Will, weren't submitted, but the other 2 that weren't recommended for Caldwell County are on standby and ready to go. I think if, we'd include basically anything on that standby list that wasn't, even high risk projects, we wouldn't include any critical risk because those have to be completely redone, and we wouldn't include any high risk where the project needs to be rescoped entirely. But there's a lot of projects where they're considered high risk just based on where they are in the development process. Like say they were just a little too early in engineering to give us full confidence, and so they're high risk. But assuming that project development is continuing over the next year, we feel comfortable keeping on that standby list and going back and saying, because some of those are very high ranking projects that scored really well and will in all likelihood be ready to go by if the opportunity to jump into that standby list occurs. A lot of those high risk projects would have moved down into the moderate category based on just continuing development. So I think that's we'd have that list kind of what you're talking about, Will. That's my intent. It's basically it's right there because as good as we do this process, we're talking about recommending 50 projects at this point. Not every single one's going to go exactly the way we think it's going to. Things happen. That's just the nature of the business. And so want to give these other ones that are on the standby list an opportunity to take a bite of the apple, I would think. So yeah, I think yeah. Hopefully that made sense.
Good. Thank you, Ryan. Charlie?
Yeah, probably should have taken my hand down because I think you answered it. So the standby list would not look at those Caldwell projects that weren't submitted correctly.
Yeah, we just didn't, we didn't evaluate those projects. That's the problem with that. We don't have the information on those projects right now. But Caldwell County has 2 other projects that were submitted. Right. Not recommended, but they are. They would be on the standby list. The other 2, including a lot of other projects that I think have a lot of value for the region based on their score. And assuming that risk level drops by the time we have that, we can take a look at those.
Yeah, and maybe I don't know. Maybe there should be a thought of go ahead and scoring them and just taking a look. I don't know. I don't know.
I mean,
It's
and-
like,
and
like Bob
again-
said, it's a slippery slope. I
We
don't-
scored every single project in the process that we had the application for.
So you did
I-
score the ones that did not get submitted correctly.
No, those didn't come into our system. They were like in the way our system works, basically, if you have a draft application, it's in this, I would almost call it limbo, where it doesn't pull into our database until you hit the submit button. And so they're still sitting in limbo. We don't have access to that information right now.
But
But
Ryan, correct me, Ryan, if I'm, and again, I'm just trying to make sure everybody has clarity on this. You can see that it's a completed application. Let's take 142 in Caldwell. You can see it's a completed application. In other words, we're not coming back later and filling out the application. It just literally was not submitted correctly and got caught in limbo.
yeah,
Is that
so I mean,
fair?
I can see the data fields. I can't access any of the attachments or anything like that.
Okay,
I would have to get
okay.
with our developers to recover the entire application. I mean, that is theoretically possible. And I can see that, yeah, it was in progress. I couldn't see any of the attachments though, because those
Okay,
don't come into the system until that submission. So
understood. Understood.
thank you.
Thank you. Bob? Bob, did you have a question?
Food for thought, just a suggestion. Once again, making any change or to the evaluation now is a slippery slope. And I appreciate the tough situation that everybody's in, but I would recommend you're not going to realistically need the standby list, I don't think, for probably a year.
Yeah.
And so because I know CAMPO staff has nothing else to do, perhaps what you might consider is wait simply a year and then have a program call for the standby list. That would allow entities to fix whatever issues they have. It would then allow entities to get more clarity on their progress and then have the standby list ranked based on the new submissions. That's just a thought, rather than comparing an apple and an orange. Because if you allow people to submit things now, well, I would like to change some things too, everybody would. So, I mean, it's just like bidding a job, everybody turns in what they got at the appointed time and the chips fall where they may. So I would just make a suggestion that have a
I
uniform
think that's very
process
clear.
a year from now, and that would allow a lot of entities that were on the bubble for uncertainty on progress to get those situations in a much better place and might improve their ranking substantially. There, just a thought.
Oh, that's a good point. So thank you. Taking notes here.
Okay. Richard? Richard, you're muted.
Thank you. I would agree with Bob. I would not want to reopen this competitive process now. I do know the city of Austin has been not awarded more federal grant applications than we have been awarded, and we typically are able to have a debrief to learn how to make a stronger application next time. So yeah, definitely would not support reopening this call application, as it is a competitive process. In terms of combining project applications, I'm trying to look at that through the lens of the public. What would they want to see? They want to see pieces of something, or would they rather have a wholesome project? I think they should be evaluated if it's one project with the entire project rather than independently.
Thank you.
Ryan, for that particular one, did that question come up because some of those portions of what might have been a more holistic project were rejected where some were accepted, and the thought was then they can't do it all together. Is that why that came up at all as a question?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of instances. I know like where Round Rock, and Brian, I don't know if you want to jump in on this, where segment 5 and 6, 6 was recommended, but 5 was not. And then I think it came up at the board meeting related to SH29, where there's a project that's filling in a gap in a current project. And so it basically, so that I think that's where that particular the board conversation came from. But, it's something to consider. I think, it's one thing, it'll change the cost benefit analysis of a project if you combine them. But sometimes, and I think a lot of ways, when we remodel it, it'll create a different project with different results if they're considered holistically, especially so for the modeling, just for clarification, we have a baseline model that we had to go in, any projects that were in the 2050 model that were submitted in this call were removed. So we had a consistent baseline, and then we would plug in your projects and see what it did to VHT and how much it reduced VHT. And we would do it one at a time, independently for each project and see those results. We would have to go back and combine pieces and remodel things. And sometimes I don't know what those results would look like. I'd imagine sometimes, the modeling, maybe it'll show more VHT together than, simply adding them together. Hopefully that makes sense. But, if they have independent utility, I don't know. Kind of thinking out loud here.
Thank you.
So,
Angela, I saw your hand. Oh.
Emily,
Yeah.
that issue did come up at the board meeting. And my remarks to that were, first, they were submitted as separate projects. We did not break them up. Two, if we allow folks to go back, combine the projects, and then run them through again, we're starting over. And the combined project is a different project. So when they were submitted as separate projects, we assumed because they submitted them as separate projects. And when we looked at them, we assessed them as segments of independent utility. So we assumed that the sponsors, when they submitted them, didn't expect to get everything they submitted. Because most folks, I would think most sponsors didn't expect to get everything they submitted. So they were going to be good with one or the other or both. So those were my remarks to the board. Is, in my opinion, if that happens, that's a new project and everybody should have a chance to it.
Thanks, Ashby. Yeah, that makes sense. Angela, I saw your hand go up. Just making sure you intended to take it down before I call the next person.
No, we're good. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Brian?
Yeah, so I figured I should say something since Ryan called me out directly. But for us, the Kenny Ford applications, there's good reasons to have the projects be separate segments, right? Because you don't want a package that's bid for, you get a different clientele when you have a $60 million project versus a $30 million project, et cetera, et cetera. So there is probably good reasons to have projects bid separate in logical segments, even for the public to see. I mean, we're working on multiple segments of data school. While we would have wished that both of those segments got funded, our curiosity was more why one segment scored so much higher than the other. But at the same time, the whole topic, combining applications and fixing applications, is kind of the same thing. It's whether you want to reopen them to scoring or not. And I think listening to the conversation here, and even my own opinion is, if you're submitting a job application or you're submitting a RFQ or an RFP, you don't get a do-over necessarily on a competitive process. And so to have CAMPO staff rescore them all means that we would be, everybody would want a different score now that we've seen the scores, right? So it wouldn't make sense to do that.
Thanks, Brian. Will?
So I think those are all very good points. I think Bob's point in reality, of many of us who have been through these call for projects in project development for our daily lives and careers. We all know those things will all change within a year. Some won't, most will, as far as project development, timelines, levels of risk. Again, kind of the suggestion Bob, or the comment Bob made, I don't want to put words in Bob's mouth, but the comment Bob made of those things would be completely different potentially in a year, which again, in my experience, they are. When I last chaired CAMPO and went through the last call, a lot of those things changed after a year, and projects were in very different places. Why wouldn't we want to look at it in a year and reevaluate? For the projects that are on the standby list, I'm not talking about projects that currently scored and funded.
Thank you, Will.
Thanks.
No, that's a really good point. So thank you.
Thanks, Will. Ed?
So curious, Brian, I know the city of Austin had submitted a regional TDM project, and it actually was the only TDM project that was in the whole list. About a little more than 1% of the total money that's available. And I know we have, money that's going towards those programs right now, but, as we get in the latter part of this decade, the funding is going to not be there. And there's an opportunity for this CAMPO to step up with the TDM to help continue that. Maybe this is not the right place to have TDM coming out of. Maybe it's a regional partnership like it's done with the construction partnership, but I was a little bit disappointed that not to see a project like that of regional significance and trying to change behavior not being selected. And maybe maybe this is not the place that the program to fund that, and maybe we should start thinking about that, because I think we're going to make a lot of good progress in the next several years with the EPA grant that was here, along with CAMPO funding. But after 2029, it looks like we may just drop off the face of the earth as far as funding for TDM, unless we have a regional concerted effort to try to raise some funding for that program. And I was surprised that it was shown as a high risk as well. I was curious about that. How could a program like that be high risk and not being implemented until 2029? You don't have to answer that. I could talk to you offline about that, Brian.
Yeah, no, certainly. And that'll be part of the report as well. So one thing that's in the report, spent all of last week summarizing. So regarding risk, just wanted to point this out that, we had 9 people looking at every single application, 3 people were dedicated to risk, but very extensive notes and spreadsheets for everybody. What I spent last week doing was pulling all of those notes into basically a summary paragraph for each project. And so you're going to get that later this week. Basically just a quick, this is exactly where the issues were and what needs to be fixed. So hopefully it'll give you good feedback. So that will definitely be in that report coming out later. I don't want to get in the weeds talking about individual products, but we can certainly talk about that offline for sure. So thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Richard? You're still muted.
You're on mute.
Oh, man. Sorry about that, guys. So yeah, City of Austin, we have the similar questions on why TDM programming during that peak regional construction was designated high risk, and I appreciate that we'll be getting more details on on the scoring and how these were scored. I would prefer that this body postpone any action on recommendation until we've had time to study and evaluate and receive those more detailed reports on why certain projects were ranked the way they were and others not. And just a couple more comments from the city of Austin. I can appreciate wanting to optimize the carbon reduction CRP funding as well as TASA, but reprogramming some of the critical City of Austin projects from the STVG funding. You know, we aren't really, we can't really support the TASA and CRP are not as certain in the out years as STVG. And so, you know, we would want to definitely look at some more details on how and why those things got reprogrammed.
Thank you, Richard. Anyone else have any questions or comments? See any, Ryan, for clarification, the policy board is to hear this and act on it on the 8th, at their 8th meeting, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. Okay. Cole?
Yeah, I am curious if others feel like there is an appetite to get into the details. I feel like there's a whole host of new information, but there's also information that just hasn't been presented or discussed in any level of detail at the project level. And so it feels a little premature to walk away with like a recommendation without having an opportunity to discuss further.
I think a lot of it weighs into kind of the analysis done by, as we kind of talked about in our previous meeting, the 9 separate reviewers kind of at the project level, which created this list. Bob?
I'd say at this point, it's really, to me, did the CAMPO staff do what they said they were going to do and follow the procedures that they said they were going to follow? Each of us has a lot of time that we can go and talk to CAMPO staff regarding this project specifics and learn from that. Last time Williamson County got $0. And we spent an incredible amount of time studying and trying to figure out what we did, well, what we could do better. And the biggest thing was listen to what CAMPO staff was telling us in the briefings. And so this time we paid a little bit more attention to what CAMPO staff was telling us, quite frankly, and as to how they were scoring. So I think we're all busy. I don't really want to go down a bunch of project-specific rabbit trails for anybody's specific project at this point. If there's process questions, I think, or procedural questions, I think those are appropriate. But if the questions are project specific, I would prefer that the entity go down that rabbit trail with the staff at a later time.
Yep, thanks, Bob. Cole, you have another comment or question?
Yeah, kind of continuation. So from a process perspective, I am curious with the information that's presented today. There was a reconsideration on 4 projects, risk assessment from high risk to allow them to go from not recommended to recommended. So can we hear more about what it took to reconsider those 4 applications?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the 3 Great Springs projects, the main concern was capacity for that agency as a new nonprofit. And, you know, the board asked us to revisit those projects. We looked at that and reconsidered that. You know, it's balancing the risk of losing TASA from the region versus taking a little bit of more risk than was initially assessed. And so that's why we moved it moderate. So all moderate projects come with a contingency that, you know, some X, Y, or Z needs to be done to make sure that, you know, the project's able to move forward. So that moved from moderate. The contingency is that they complete the current study that we have with them right now. And we, you know, work through them through an entire study. We know how their capacity is. So that's what happened with that one. The Philomena sidewalk project, that project is at 30% design. which was the only issue with it. We consider that to be a little too early. So we went back and looked at that one in particular. One, it's TASA eligible sidewalks. And because it's sidewalks and not a very complicated project, and because of the risk with TASA lapsing, we thought it was appropriate to move that to a moderate, assuming that we get an updated plan set 60% within the next few months and can double check that. And so we felt confident that that balanced out the risk of TASA lapsing on that project. So that was the logic between those 4 projects and making that decision.
And so just to follow up, were other projects reconsidered, such as the City of Austin's feasibility or planning studies that ranked higher than the Philomena Drive sidewalk?
So we looked at the scopes of those studies, and I might call on Will, he's more familiar with those scopes than I am, but they weren't strictly eligible for TASA. So it's when because all of those were looking at roadway corridors. And so that's why it wasn't strictly TASA on those. And so we didn't consider those. We didn't think they were eligible for TASA, basically.
Okay.
Looking at the scope of those and their inclusion in the City of Austin's transportation infrastructure, street infrastructure fund, they were all classified in that program as capacity projects, which I believe made them ineligible for TASA.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Comments or questions? Okay, not seeing any. With that, we'll entertain a motion.
So move.
To approval. Motion to approve, Bob, I'm assuming.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Can you clarify what the motion is? Sorry.
Yeah. Yep. Is the motion to approve, Bob, the recommended list as provided by the CAMPO staff?
That is correct.
Okay. And the person who seconded, which I missed.
Cool. City Georgetown.
Thank you.
So with that, the standby list would remain as it currently is and not have a chance for reevaluation in a year.
Ryan, can you clarify the standby list, please?
Standby list is going to be anything that's on the list that isn't currently recommended, that doesn't have some dramatic, like critical risk projects need to be rescoped and would need to be resubmitted entirely. It's projects that all projects on that list that basically, we'll revisit the list that don't have such huge issues that they would need to be resubmitted basically. So that's probably, I would say probably about 15 of the projects that weren't recommended won't be on the standby list, but the rest would be. So
Do we get CAMPO to staff to adjust their recommendation to address the concerns expressed at the TAC today, to where the recommendation is that we have a project list going forward to be approved and funded, but that there will be a new list created a year from now for the standby projects where entities can resubmit for consideration?
So, and all that's pending available funding if that shakes out.
No. It would be the formation of the standby list. There would be no standby list created at this time, but then there would be a standby list a year from now. You're not going to need it for a year anyway, but you would create the standby list a year from now and give entities such as the City of Austin or Caldwell County or whoever, all of us, a chance to update our applications and learn from it, and we'll go through this again a year from now to create the standby list. That is gives a level playing field to Caldwell County and the city and Travis County and everybody else for getting their ranking on the standby list and addresses some of the concerns.
Brian, did you have a comment or response to that?
No, I mean, yeah, we'll certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Richard, do you have a question?
Yes, I have I'd like to make an alternate motion to postpone today's action vote until such time as City of Austin can receive more detailed information in terms of some of these project rankings and assignments of high versus medium risk.
Ryan or Ashby, can I get some assistance? I think we need to act on the motion that has been made and seconded first before accepting an additional motion.
It's the opposite.
It's the opposite.
That was
So first he needs a second, but you have to.
not if it's not good with the second and the motioner.
Huh?
I'm sorry, Ashby, can you clarify, please?
No, well, he offered an alternate motion. He didn't ask to amend, he offered an alternate motion.
So we can take that motion then as well.
Take that one first.
Take that one first. If I get a second to that motion to postpone.
Second by Cole.
Brian, you had a question?
Yeah, Bob, what you're actually proposing isn't necessarily a standby list, and it's a miniature new call for projects? Because that seems a little different from a level of effort standpoint for CAMPO staff. Is it sounds like basically what you're asking for is a miniature call to be on a standby list, as opposed to them taking the existing scoring moderate risk projects and putting them on a standby list if funding becomes available.
Correct. Correct. What I'm saying is, recommending is that in order to address the concerns that were expressed today from a variety of entities, that I acknowledge that it is a tremendous increase in effort to the CAMPO staff, and for that I apologize, but it is what it is. But that, yes, a year from now, they have a call for projects that would allow them to be placed on the standby list. And everyone would be reevaluated at that time to be ranked on that standby list. There's no dollars currently identified for projects, but if you're going to have a standby list, then I think it needs to be a fair treatment of all folks and not just give special treatment to some.
No, thanks for that explanation, Bob, because I think I was understanding it the way Brian was describing it, where we would just put the list as it is currently and just really just kind of double check to see where do a updated risk assessment, but the scores would remain the same, and then go down that list. But yeah, talking about two different levels of effort, but yeah.
But how do you then deal with the Caldwell County issue where they failed to really submit? Or, how do you deal with a City of Austin issue where they may be able to tweak it and apply for, a different sort of funding or something? I mean, I think if you're going to touch it, if you open the box, you open the box.
I do think, there's I see where you're coming from, and I do think, there's a lot of value in having a standby list, especially as reauthorization comes down. If for some reason we get a bunch more money, or, something happens that changes that, and then we've got these projects that have been evaluated and are ready to go. So, just trying to think through that process and how that would go. But yeah, it doesn't address Caldwell. Like if it wasn't submitted in this call, then they wouldn't be on that list essentially. So that's kind of, but they have two other projects that were submitted that would be on that list, I guess. So
yeah, but since you're not going to need the standby list for a year,
yeah,
then let people get lessons learned from this process. Let's let people make their administrative corrections, and let's give everyone a fair, clean shot and update what they have. And I think it would perhaps provide some people that are that were not quite reviewed as ready now, a year from now, may be able to change their status and score a little better. Anyway, I just think it's for fairness. You got to treat, you have to open it and let everybody have a redo, or nobody does. It can't be a partial thing.
Thank you, Bob. Okay. With that, I see no other hands, so we will act on the second motion that's seconded, which was a request to postpone the item. I could get, for ease, for all those in favor, please raise your little virtual hand. Okay. Okay, good. And then we'll take our hands down. Perfect. So I had 4 people there. All those opposed to postponing, please raise your hand. Okay. With that, the motion fails. So we'll we'll take our hands down.
So
there we go. So for initial motion made by Bob and was seconded, motion to approve with a recommendation to create a standby list through another call for projects within in a year. With that, we'll do hands, all those in favor. Okay. Thank you, 17. And then we'll take them down. Let that clear out. Okay, and then all those opposed.
Emily's Richard, I'd like to be shown as abstaining.
Okay.
And me as well. Cool.
Okay.
Same.
Same for Lila.
That was Angela and Lila. 17.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. All right. With that item will proceed the TAC recommendation to the June 8th board meeting. Okay. All right, we'll move on to
Emily, if this is Ed Collins, if I may.
Sure, Ed, I'm sorry.
This is a technical recommendation and the board will take it as a technical recommendation. I've seen it in the past where they've added projects, taken away projects. So maybe that's something that some of our partners may want to talk to their board members about. Typically, they don't always adopt the staff recommendation. I mean, they have, but it's a technical recommendation, and there's other factors that the board can put into play.
Of course, absolutely, they can.
And before we move on to the next item, I just want to make a couple of comments. I think, that Bob said, they kind of, in your recommendation, I think the important thing for me, at least, is saying that staff did this process the way it was outlined, that we were transparent about everything. And I get, Director Mendoza, your point to, we don't have all the, the information that will be sent out in the next couple of days. Please read through all of that and, talk with your board members. I do want to point out that the reason it's taking so long to get this information out is because there's so much, and we want to distill it into, everything into a single package, but there wasn't a single decision that was made arbitrarily. We did everything, exactly by the process. That's how the results shook out. It's very important that we do everything fairly, transparently, and just follow the process. And then the results are what they are. We did have to make some, decisions. But I think I feel very confident in the work that we've done and we've produced, and in the information that we'll send out later this week, you'll see all of that. If you have any questions, because I can certainly answer any of the questions on specific projects that y'all have today if you want. But I know we're gonna also have this conversation afterwards. But we were as thorough as we could possibly be on these projects and on this review, and I think the results and the information you'll get will speak to that. So I just want to be very clear about that. So anyways, that was it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. I think we heard that through the lead up to today's meeting. So appreciate all of your efforts. Seems like it was a very tedious task. So thank you for all your work. With that, we'll go to item 4, report on transportation planning activities.
I've checked with everyone, but I'll double check again. Anyone have here? Anyone?
Now, just one thing, the latest population estimates program, estimates came out last week, and the city of Hutto is at 46,000, a little bit over. So it's very likely that next year, the city of Hutto will join the policy board.
There you go. All right. That's all we have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. With that, item 5, the next policy board meeting is coming up on June 8th, and our next TAC meeting will be on June 22nd. And with that, thank you all for your time today. We'll adjourn at 2:50.